Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Binyamin Tjong-Alvares with the highlights from the world economy. On today's show, Abe wins Japanese elections, but how will Abenomics fare? And climate prospects remain unclear in wake of Lima conference. First, the headlines. Stocks throughout Asia weakened on Monday as worries about a terrorist attack in Australia added to pressure from declining oil prices and slower regional growth. In Australia, a suspected terrorist attack helped push the ASX 200 down 0.64%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng fell 1%. Concerns about a prolonged property market slump in China also kept investors at bay. China's growth could slow to 7.1% next year from about 7.4% this year, as the domestic property slump weighs on the world's second largest economy. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe vowed on Monday to push up wages as he forges ahead with his economic policies the day after his election victory. By raising wages, Abe aims to establish a positive economic cycle of higher earnings, wages, and consumption to end deflation. By postponing a second tax increase to 2017, Abe hopes more people will benefit from wage increases over the next 2 years. But Japanese companies expect a marked deterioration in business conditions, according to a central bank survey published hours after Abe's sweeping victory. More in Japan following the headlines.
He didn't talk about foreign policy. He didn't talk about constitutional revision. But this is Mr. Shinzo Abe, who sees his role as moving Japan towards constitutional revision and of raising Japan's profile in the world.
China will create 3 new free trade zones modeled on one established a year ago in Shanghai as Beijing tries to boost slowing growth. The 3 new zones will be established in the southern and eastern provinces of Guangdong and Fujian and in the northern port city of Tianjin. But investors are mostly disappointed by Shanghai's free trade zone, saying it provides almost no advantages for foreign or domestic companies operating there. Officials also discussed the possibility of setting up free trade zones in countries along the so-called 21st century Silk Road between China and Europe. Egyptians fear the closure of some foreign embassies in Cairo could cause severe damage to their country's economy. The Canadian and British embassies closed down following a threat targeting foreign embassies last week. As Egypt battles an Islamist insurgency centered around the Sinai Peninsula near the border with Gaza and Israel, tourism is expected to plunge. Officials also expressed concern of the effect it may have on foreign investment, which is sorely needed by the struggling economy. Abe's Liberal Democratic Party on Sunday won more than the two-thirds supermajority required that smooths parliamentary business, but voter turnout was at a record low of 53.3%, underlining Japan's weakened support for Abenomics. Joan Citruk and Daniel Roth bring us the details.
Together, Shinzo Abe's Liberal Democratic Party and their new partner, New Komeito, have won a large majority in Japan's snap elections. Over 2/3 of the 475 seats in the Japanese Assembly. It's a victory for the incumbent and a clear mandate for the continuation of his economic policies, a program known as Abenomics.
My Abenomics policies are still only halfway done, but I believe we have moved away from those dark days 2 or 3 years ago. I am aware that there are still a lot of people who still do not feel the benefits, but it's my duty to bring about these policies to those very people, and I believe this election also voiced that clearly.
Launched in late 2012, Abenomics focuses on fiscal stimulus, loose monetary policy, and liberalization of labor regulations. But positive effects have been lacking, with Japan reporting a surprising recession last quarter due to a drop in consumer and investment activity since April's sales tax hike. As well, inflation still hasn't met its 1.2% target set by the Bank of Japan for the 2014-15 year.
This election is nonsense from a citizen's point of view. This is a waste of the taxpayers' money. Abe only did it so that he could stay in power longer.
It's okay if Abe raises the sales tax to 10%, as long as he takes measures to improve the economy as well.
To limit the negative consumption impact of a forthcoming increase on sales tax, the Prime Minister said he would ask employers to raise pay in a gesture to increase the population's ability to keep on consuming. The Prime Minister also promised to look into a new plan to stimulate activity, which should be unveiled before the end of the year.
And Carly Forster from financial analytics firm Tipranks joins us now in the studio for a few company highlights as earnings season continues. Ms. Forster, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so who do you have here on our plate today?
All right, well, this week we have Oracle, BlackBerry, and Nike, who are all set to announce earnings reports this week. Okay. So let's start with Oracle, who is set to announce their second quarter fiscal 2015 earnings report on Wednesday. Now, they're expected to post 64 cents earnings per share, down from the same quarter last year when they posted 66 cents earnings per share. Ooh. Now, for the past 3 consecutive quarters, though, Oracle has missed estimates by roughly 2 to 4 cents. And in addition, this is going to be the first earnings report that the company posts ever since Larry Ellison stepped down as president and went into the chairman role.
Okay.
Yes. Now, for the past 3 months, insiders sold 1.81 million shares, and for the entire year, they sold 9.3 million shares.
Right.
Now, ever since 2012, Oracle has been maintaining its stock by increasing buyback shares. So this is still going to happen, but at a much slower pace. In addition, new license revenue and cloud software subscription revenue is going to be a main focus in this quarter, much more than it was so in past quarters.
Is there anything we should be looking out for? And what is weighing on the shares?
Well,
it's essentially the U.S. dollar does it have an impact?
Yeah, definitely. The U.S. dollar definitely has an impact, and so we'll see how it turns out.
Right, okay.
So next we have BlackBerry, who's set to announce their third quarter earnings report on Friday. Now, they're set to post a loss of 5 cents a share, which is a huge increase from last year when they posted a loss of 67 cents a share. Now, BlackBerry has seen a huge turnaround this year ever since John Chen stepped in as CEO back in November of 2013. Now, what really made BlackBerry turn around was its switch in focus from smartphones to software. Now,
clearly they have their work cut out for them because, I mean, the smartphone world was more or less taken over entirely by iPhones and afterwards by Androids. I mean, BlackBerry really kind of had no share of the market left. So they're into software now.
Now they're into software. Actually, back in November, BlackBerry launched BES12, which is a new platform for businesses to connect all of its mobile devices, including BlackBerry's competitors. So that'll be interesting to see. So,
smart move.
Yeah, definitely. Now, BlackBerry got 5.1 million licensees to sign up for a free trial of the platform, and this is going to end at the end of January.
Right.
So analysts have been optimistic that with BlackBerry's move away from market consumerism, however, they've also been questioning how the corporate user trials are going to be converted, if they're going to be converted to paying users.
Okay. Let's move to Nike. Nike's the next one, right?
Sure. So Nike is set to announce their second quarter earnings report on Thursday. Now, they're expected to post 69 cents earnings per share, up from 59 cents earnings per share the same quarter last year. Now, Nike's been doing a really good job competing with competitors like Lululemon, The Gap, and Under Armour, despite some internal setbacks. You know, that includes a trial that's going on between 3 of its former shoe designers who left the company to start a factory with competitor Adidas. In addition, the company's chief information officer left the company last week after 10 short months, citing personal reasons. So despite these setbacks, Nike remains one of the most popular athletic retail brands today. So all in all, it'll be interesting to see how all these factors will play into these quarterly reports and how the stocks will benefit.
Okay, well, Carly Forster, thanks for educating us about these 3 big companies. Thank you very much. 6 years after nations of the world failed to agree on policies targeting climate change, a conference in Lima offers new hope, but it remains to be seen to what extent announcements made at the UN Climate Change Conference this year will actually lead to change. Here's Anthony Leslie with more.
196 countries and 2 weeks of debate led to little in Lima. There is no comprehensive plan coming out of the summit, but participating countries are being called on to limit emissions to some extent in order to fight against global warming. It's a framework for moving forward, the objective of which is to reduce CO2 emissions by 40 to 70% by 2050, a necessity to limit global temperature rise to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels.
We had these announcements from the U.S. and China. We had lots of good announcements from countries in Latin America about renewable energy, about protecting forests. And where we are now is that we have a weak text, and we're going to have an incredibly hard road towards Paris if we want to get a good global deal.
A final agreement is aimed at for the upcoming summit in Paris in late 2015, 6 years after the failure of Copenhagen. But the conference in Lima was plagued by tension between developing countries and industrialized countries.
Now, I know this is difficult for developing nations. We understand that. But we have to remember that today, more than half of global emissions, more than half, are coming from developing nations.
Developing countries, after a tough battle, did drive home the message that their growth needs have to be addressed so that they don't fall behind.
If we do not take balanced approach, it will be injustice to the poor. Instead of making polluters to pay, let us not make poor to pay.
To help the poorest countries, a green fund was created following the Copenhagen conference in 2009.
As of today, the fund has made a lot of advancement in mobilizing its initial resources. We stand at close to $10.2 billion equivalent of pledges from 27 countries.
No progress has been achieved, though, for developing countries on the promise to provide aid in the amount of $100 billion by 2020. It's just one question among others to be resolved in 2015.
And we're joined now by i24 News reporter Daniel Roth for a look at both offbeat and remarkable stories that we found for you from the World Press and Media Watch. Daniel, thanks for joining us.
How's it going?
Good.
So the first story we have is from Tel Aviv 1, which is an internet-based radio station. There's this interesting and important interview with Meirav Arlozorov, who's a senior columnist with The Marker, also an important publication here in Israel, talking about what the elections that have just been called for about 3 months from now mean for the economy.
Right.
And the answer, in brief, is a lot. But in specifically, first of all, Yair Lapid, the Minister of Finance, actually only served 20 months in this role. So just under 2 years. This government is one of the shortest-lived governments in history. Also just about 2 years. So one of the things that Arlozorov said is that Yair Lapid notoriously in these 20 months refused to listen to his civil servants. To essentially, another way of putting that is Yair Lapid, the Minister of Finance, didn't listen to the experts working for him in the Ministry of Finance. So from that point of view, it may be a good thing that Lapid is perhaps on his way out of this position, that someone else may take charge. Who knows if they'll be better or worse? This is a big question. This may be the only good point. Really, most of it is negative news. You're talking about 2 years of government instability. You're talking about growing poverty in Israel, instability. You're talking about the Minister of Education, Shai Piron, tried to implement more reforms than almost anyone in the history of reforms. But most of them, Arlozorov notes, didn't have a chance to go through because the government was so short-lived. And some of these reforms really matter for economics, trying to have this minimum level of mathematics and stuff like that in religious schools, in Orthodox schools, which would then help lift Orthodox communities out of poverty. These kinds of things that may just never be implemented. This is what you're talking about when you're talking about quick elections. So you're not only talking about kind of the instability that affects the markets and investment, you're talking about the instability that affects an entire generation. So
it's a waste of opportunity. It's a waste of work that people put into it that just, may never come to fruition.
Right, exactly. And so, I guess if there's a crux to this interview, it's really that when you look at having quick elections, on one hand, you're talking about, okay, there's an opportunity for change. But on the other hand, you're talking about there's no opportunity to really try things out. And that's really what's at the base here. That's the balance you have when you call elections 2 years in.
Okay. Well, we'll see what happens with that. Daniel and Roth, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
That concludes our Economy Magazine. I'm Binyamin Tjong-Alvares. Follow me on Twitter at Tjong-Alvares. Send us your comments via the feedback link and join us again tomorrow.